Good evening. Really, this is such a, I'm just going to turn over here. If we were on a ship, we'd be sinking right now. It's real quick, the Sunday nights, it being an abbreviated service, is really just meant to be a word of encouragement for the week. I hope that you're encouraged by the messages on Sunday morning, but one of the benefits is that you can be encouraged and you don't have to listen to me as long on Sunday nights. Those that are watching this online, that would be a perfect opportunity for you to visit then. Hebrews chapter 5, though. Hebrews chapter 5. I just want to read a few verses here, beginning in verse 12. But Hebrews chapter 5, by this time you ought to be teachers. You have need again for someone to teach you the elementary principles of the oracles of God, and you have come to need milk and not solid food. For everyone who partakes only of milk is not accustomed to the word of righteousness, for he is an infant. But solid food is for the mature, who because of practice have their senses trained to discern both good and evil. And really, I just wanted to focus predominantly on four words that are there in verse 14, or three words rather. Because of practice. Because of practice. They train their senses to look at godly things. Colossians chapter 3, verses 1 through 3, that we are to set our sights on things that are above, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. We're not to be necessarily all that concerned with earthly things, because these things will one day pass away, but the word of God stands forever. They were training their senses to look at godly things, and they were able to discern, it says, both good and evil. They were able to tell what was right and wrong, not just in a cultural morality sense or what the culture says is right and wrong, but they were able to discern. They were able to look at a situation and determine what was godly and what was ungodly. We might say what's biblical and what's not biblical. To do these things, though, there was something that they had to do. There were two things that they had to do, really. The first was that they had to leave the elementary teachings about Christ. They had to leave those things, because for them to be able to discern good and evil, you can't be an infant in the faith. Someone who's just recently or been baptized, or someone who's maybe a younger Christian, not a recent baptism, maybe within the last few years or so. But they have to study, and they have to continue on, and they've got to drink from those deeper wells, as the Old Testament prophet says. So that's one of the things that they had to do. Now, how is it that you leave the elementary principles of Christ behind? It's not that they're forgotten. It's that we've learned them, and it's time for us to move on. It's time for us to mature, time for us to grow in our faith. Now, how did they do that? Well, it's those three words there in verse 14, because of their practice. Because of practice. That's how they were able to mature and move on. It's not good enough to just read the Bible, but we have to practice what we read. It's not good enough to just preach and teach the Word of God, but we have to practice what we preach. We have to actually put it into action. And sometimes just tagging on to this morning's lesson is that sometimes that's going to mean getting uncomfortable. But it's the only way that we're able to mature. The only way that we're able to grow. The only way that when we look out in the religious world, we can say, that is right. That is wrong. John 4, 23 and 24, that the hour is coming and now is, where the true worshipers will worship God in spirit and in truth, for God is spirit and the Father is seeking such as to worship him. The only way that we're able to discern the spirit and the truth is to actually have put our faith into practice. Not just reading it through so we can check a little box off as we're going throughout the year, but but to actually practice what it is that we're doing. There in 2 Timothy 3, verses 16 and 17, it says that God has given us all things. You know that the Bible, the Scriptures, the Word of God, it's profitable for teaching us what is right, what is not right, how to get right, and how to stay right. It has everything in there, and Peter would write that he's given us all things pertaining to life and godliness through a knowledge of Him, through an understanding of God, through being able to discern right and wrong, to be able to tell that difference, who's called us out of darkness, Peter says, and into His marvelous light. You know, there's not really a way for me to tell you how to put your faith into practice. There's not. I'd love to be able to do that. There are certain measures that we can all take. But what we have to do is, in our study of the Word and seeing how the Word of God speaks to us, really what we've got to do is look for the opportunities. So we read our Bible, we study our Bible, we see what it says to do, and then as we go out into the world, whether it's to work or running errands or school or with our friends or whatever, but we look for the opportunities to apply what it is that we've actually learned and how we can approach different people. And that's different for everybody. The opportunities that I have aren't going to necessarily be the same opportunities that you have. The opportunities that you have, I may not have access to. We're looking at different demographics, different types of people, different geographical areas, different circumstances. We're trying to examine the lives of people that we know, and not everyone comes from the same background. So I'd love to be able to have this one size fits all approach, but there's just not one. You know, if you look at it this way, we're here in the DFW Metroplex. If you were to go to downtown Dallas, you're going to approach someone with the gospel there differently than if you were in Ding Dong, Texas. And yes, that is an actual place. Okay, it's outside of Copper's Cove. I think the population is 4. There's like one trailer and a broken down convenience store. But it was famous enough to be on Jeopardy, so. But you're going to approach people differently. And when you read through the gospel accounts, we see that Christ approached people differently as well. He was one way with the religious leaders, those who should have known better, and he was a completely different way with the woman at the well in John chapter 4. He was one way with his disciples, and he was another way with the woman who was pulled out into the middle of the street when people wanted to stone her. Again, I'd love to give a one-size-fits-all, but the best advice that I can give is in your daily reading, take the time to actually read. Have you ever listened as a lot of kids read the Bible out loud? They just kind of run through. They don't even pause at commas or semicolons or periods or anything. Actually do that and read the Bible out loud, not just in your own head, but how does it sound? Because the Word of God, it's a living, breathing, active thing. How does it sound to you when the Word of God is coming into your ears and not just into your head? When you're pausing to reflect, you know, in the Psalms, you see that word Selah several times, S-E-L-A or S-E-L-A-H. That was actually, most people believe, a note to the choir master to pause after what was said, to be able to reflect on what he has just said. Take the time to pause. Don't just read through, but take the time to pause and interpret what does that mean to me? How can I apply that to my life? And then go out and look for those opportunities, because they are out there. If we hear, and I haven't taken an opportunity to count, we'll just say 20 people. If we hear focused even just on one person throughout the year in studying the Word of God with them, in a year this size would double. And then that second year, that 40 becomes 80. The third year, that 80, 160. That fifth year, 160 to 320. but we have to look for the opportunities. And maybe you need the prayers of the congregation. Maybe that's been a struggle for you. And you need just the prayers of your brothers and sisters for strength or to look for that. Or maybe you want to talk to me or someone else afterwards about different ways to look for opportunities or maybe how to approach different people. But if there's anything that we can assist you with in your walk with Christ and getting yourself closer to the cross, but bringing others to the cross as well, we'd love to do that, and you can make it known as we stand and as we sing.